For a long time, it can feel like decisions require an internal meeting. Multiple voices presenting arguments. One voice raising concerns. Another voice offering encouragement. Another voice reviewing past experiences. Another voice imagining future outcomes. Each perspective attempting to ensure the right choice is made. The intention behind this process is understandable. The mind wants stability. It wants safety. It wants to reduce risk. It wants to prevent regret. It wants to anticipate consequences. It wants to make the best possible move. But something subtle begins to show itself over time. The inner debate rarely produces the clarity it promises. Instead, it often produces delay, because every argument can generate another counterargument. Every perspective can generate another perspective. Every possible outcome can lead to another imagined scenario. Thought has an extraordinary ability to continue expanding the field of consideration indefinitely. And while consideration can be useful, endless consideration begins to create friction. Not because thinking is a problem, but because the expectation that thinking must produce certainty creates pressure that thinking cannot fulfill. The mind is designed to evaluate possibilities. It is not designed to eliminate all uncertainty. Uncertainty is not a malfunction in life. Uncertainty is part of how life remains dynamic, part of how learning continues, part of how discovery happens, part of how intelligence adapts. When the expectation of certainty relaxes, something surprising happens. Decisions begin to form more naturally, not because the mind stops functioning, but because the mind is no longer required to guarantee outcomes before movement occurs. There is a difference between thoughtful consideration and internal argument. Consideration gathers information. Argument attempts to eliminate risk completely, and eliminating risk completely is not possible. Life is not static. Circumstances change. People change. Conditions change. Information changes. Understanding evolves. What appears to be the correct decision today may reveal new dimensions tomorrow. This does not mean decisions cannot be made wisely. It simply means wisdom includes the recognition that learning continues after the decision is made. The pressure to get everything exactly right before moving often creates more tension than clarity, because the mind begins to interpret uncertainty as danger. And when uncertainty feels dangerous, hesitation increases. The internal environment becomes more guarded. Movement becomes more cautious. Expression becomes more restricted, not because life has become more threatening, but because the internal system is attempting to guarantee outcomes that cannot be guaranteed. Decisions do not require absolute certainty in order to be intelligent. They require responsiveness. Responsiveness to available information. Responsiveness to current conditions. Responsiveness to what is actually happening rather than what is imagined. One of the reasons inner debate can become so persistent is because thought assumes responsibility for managing every possible future scenario. It attempts to anticipate every reaction. It attempts to anticipate every mistake. It attempts to anticipate every difficulty. It attempts to anticipate every consequence. But this creates an impossible task, because the number of possible scenarios is effectively endless. Trying to resolve all of them before moving is like attempting to map an entire forest before taking a single step. Movement itself reveals the path. Each step provides new information. Each interaction provides new context. Each experience refines understanding. Clarity develops through engagement, not through endless internal simulation. This does not mean thought is unhelpful. Thought can highlight important considerations. It can identify potential challenges. It can suggest useful adjustments. It can bring awareness to patterns. It can support learning. But when thought becomes responsible for eliminating uncertainty completely, its role becomes distorted. It becomes overloaded, and overloaded systems tend to become repetitive. Repetition can feel productive because activity is happening. But repetition is not always movement. Sometimes repetition is hesitation appearing busy. One of the shifts that begins to occur naturally is that decisions become simpler when they are allowed to remain provisional. Provisional does not mean careless. Provisional means responsive, open to adjustment, open to refinement, open to new information, open to learning. When decisions are allowed to evolve, the pressure to make a perfect decision decreases. And when the pressure decreases, clarity often increases. Because attention can remain connected to the present moment rather than being pulled entirely into imagined futures. Many decisions do not require the level of intensity that is often applied to them. What to say in a conversation, whether to try something new, how to approach a situation, when to begin, when to stop, when to adjust, when to allow change. These decisions happen continuously throughout the day, and they often happen successfully without extended internal debate. Life already demonstrates this constantly. Walking does not require a strategic meeting before each step. Conversation does not require a full simulation before each sentence. Adaptation happens fluidly. Adjustment happens naturally. Learning happens continuously. This same intelligence can operate in larger decisions as well, not by eliminating thought, but by allowing thought to contribute without requiring it to control everything. Inner debate often intensifies when identity feels involved. When decisions begin to feel like statements about who someone is, when outcomes begin to feel like definitions of worth, when choices begin to feel like evidence of capability or failure. When this happens, the stakes appear higher than they actually are, because the decision becomes linked to self-image rather than practical movement. The mind attempts to protect identity by minimizing risk, but protecting identity often restricts exploration. And exploration is one of the ways life learns most effectively. When decisions are not treated as identity statements, flexibility increases. Experimentation becomes easier. Adjustment becomes easier. Correction becomes easier. Learning accelerates, because mistakes are no longer interpreted as threats to identity. They are interpreted as information. Information refines direction. Information supports growth. Information reveals what works and what does not work. Information reduces the need for speculation. Direct experience often resolves questions more efficiently than extended internal debate. Experience reveals nuance. Reality provides feedback. Participation generates clarity, and clarity reduces unnecessary tension. One of the reasons inner debate can feel so convincing is because it creates the impression of control. If every possibility is considered, then perhaps nothing unexpected will occur. If every risk is evaluated, perhaps difficulty can be avoided. If every outcome is imagined, perhaps regret can be prevented. But unexpected developments are part of life. Difficulty is part of life. Learning is part of life. Even when careful planning occurs, circumstances can still change. And when they do, responsiveness becomes more useful than prior certainty. Responsiveness allows adaptation. Adaptation allows resilience. Resilience allows continued participation. The ability to adjust is often more valuable than the ability to predict perfectly. Decisions do not need to eliminate uncertainty. They need to allow movement within uncertainty. And movement itself reduces uncertainty by providing new information. Each decision creates context for the next decision. Each action generates feedback. Each adjustment improves understanding. Life becomes an ongoing conversation rather than a final exam. There is no single decision that determines everything permanently. Direction evolves continuously, and when this becomes visible, decisions can feel lighter. Not trivial, but workable. Even meaningful decisions can be approached with steadiness rather than pressure, because the recognition grows that learning continues after the decision. Support can be found. Resources can be developed. Skills can be strengthened. Perspective can change. Circumstances can improve. Movement continues. Inner debate tends to lose intensity when trust in responsiveness increases. Trust does not mean believing that everything will always be comfortable. trust means recognizing that difficulty can be navigated, that adjustment is possible, that learning occurs naturally through engagement, that capability develops through participation. Trust in responsiveness allows decisions to emerge without requiring endless internal negotiation. Clarity often appears quietly when the demand for certainty relaxes, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a simple recognition of what seems reasonable now, what seems workable now, what seems aligned now, not permanently, not absolutely, but sufficiently, and sufficient clarity allows movement. Movement provides information. Information refines clarity. Clarity supports further movement. The process becomes self-correcting. Life rarely requires perfect decisions. It requires willingness to remain engaged, willingness to adjust, willingness to learn, willingness to continue. Inner debate can begin to soften when it becomes clear that thought does not need to win every argument before life proceeds. Life is already proceeding. Even hesitation is part of that movement. Even uncertainty is part of that movement. Even reconsideration is part of that movement. Everything participates in this unfolding. Nothing stands completely outside of it. When the expectation of complete certainty relaxes, the nervous system often settles, because the impossible task of controlling every outcome is no longer being attempted. Attention can return to what is actually here, what is actually happening, what is actually needed, what is actually possible. Decisions begin to feel less like defining moments and more like natural responses. Natural responses to real conditions. Natural responses to real opportunities. Natural responses to real needs. Natural responses to real change. The internal environment becomes less argumentative and more observant, less defensive and more responsive, less pressured and more steady. Clarity does not need to be forced. Often, it simply becomes more visible when the noise of endless evaluation quiets slightly. Thought continues functioning, but it functions as support rather than as judge. It offers perspective without demanding control. It contributes insight without requiring certainty. It participates in the process rather than attempting to dominate it. Decisions without inner debate are not decisions made without intelligence. They are decisions made without unnecessary friction. And when friction decreases, energy becomes available for participation rather than self-negotiation. Life continues moving, and decisions continue forming within that movement, not because everything is known, but because knowing everything is not required for intelligent participation. Responsiveness is enough. And responsiveness is already present.